Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar on cost-benefit analysis of bicycles versus cars, brought to you by the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform. I'm Katharina Krell, Thematic Expert for Low-Carbon Economy, and your moderator for this afternoon. I'm here with my two team colleagues, Marco Citelli, who's a thematic expert like myself. Ciao, Marco. Marco is going to be our rapporteur and read the questions from the audience. And then there is Lotte van Meijel, our web expert responsible for the technical aspects. Thank you for being with us and supporting us, Lotte. And so, as usual, our webinar is being recorded. The recordings are going to be made available afterwards, alongside with the presentations from our speakers. And as usual, you are not allowed to speak as audience, unfortunately. However, you can ask us questions through the questions tab. And you can check out the handout section where we share links and relevant documents as we go along this afternoon. Again, we are almost 200 people registered. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon, or joining us again for those who are regulars of the Cycling City series. So apart from bringing great webinars to you like this afternoon, I just want to have a few words about the added value of the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform. So you know we have 4 services that are all related to interregional learning, exchanging knowledge amongst cities and regions, learning from those who have already implemented and de-risked interesting things. And today I want to highlight the expert support services. Next slide. And because these are the ones that actually could serve you if you want to get support for your region and your city in your mobility transition. I want to flag up these because these are individual services. Individual cities or administrations can request them, and they're then individualized just for you. So we have, in growing intensity, we have a policy help desk where we provide written replies to written submitted questions. We have matchmaking sessions where we organize 2-hour online or physical exchanges between one entity that is requesting and 2 or 3 peers that we find from other areas in Europe. For instance, we are organizing a matchmaking on e-bus operational management very soon for the Northwest Regional Development Agency in Romania. And our premium service is the peer reviews. These are upon request and are 2-day intense exchanges online or on site, depending, where again, upon request of a region or a city, we find 4 to 5 relevant peers, brief them, and organize a dedicated exchange around a specific policy challenge. We are just preparing a peer review for Kilkenny County Council on car restrictive policies in city centres. And the city of Warsaw has received, for instance, a peer review for the introduction of logistics strategy into their SUMP. So don't hesitate. You see the link where you can request these expert support. They are offered in this period, and they will also be offered next year and after next year, but to address your challenges. Don't hesitate. Drop me an email if you have any questions about that. Okay, so back to our webinar series. And today we are in the 5th edition. This is just to recap 1, 2, 3, and 4, strategy, infrastructure, behavioral measures, and then cargo bikes for the last mile, as we have tackled last week's. You have the recordings to explore if you've missed any. And today we focus on cost-benefit comparison of bicycles versus cars. And I have brought you together with Marco a very nice panel of experts. And the topic that we're tackling today is actually coming out of a request from you, from the audience. I think 150 people of you have voted that they want to have a webinar on cost benefit between cars and bikes. So here you go. We have 2 keynotes, and I ask all my speakers and discussants to put on their camera and greet our audience. I'm very happy to bring you 2 keynotes. First from Marie Kåstrup. She's joining us from the city of Copenhagen. She's head of the bicycle program there and also vice chair of the Cycling Embassy of Denmark. Hi, Marie. Then we're having a second keynote coming from Vienna, from Michael Meschik, from the University of Natural Resources and Life Science in Vienna, Institute of Transport Studies. Michael is a senior lecturer and researcher, and he's the author of a study of why transport policy should favor the bicycle instead of car. So, experienced in this 2 keynotes. It's a little bit different. Usually you have good practices and short pitches. Here we have opted for 2 longer keynotes because the topic is complex and we wanted to have 2 deep experts develop a little bit further the topic. Then we have 2 invited discussants who bring their expertise also from 2 estimated networks. We're having Maria Jose Rojo from Polis, who is coordinator for active travel and health. Hi, Maria Jose. And having Holger Haubold from the European Cyclist Federation. He's a director of intellectual property and data collection and also author of the EU Cycling Economy Report. So this hints, we want to talk about a monetary comparison of direct and indirect costs and savings associated to bikes and cars. Great. So I invite all of you, apart from Marie, to switch off your cameras and hand over the floor to Marie for your keynote.
Thank you, Katharina. I will just turn on my slides here. So thank you for inviting me to present the experiences from the city of Copenhagen and Denmark at large in regards to cost-benefit analysis of cycling versus cars. A quick disclaimer, I have a background in cultural studies. I have 14 years of experience working as a public officer. I'm not an economist or a researcher or a mathematician, so my focus will be on how do we use these studies in order to plan and promote cycling. I've shared some of the background reports, and I'm also very happy to provide contact with the experts who did the studies if you have more nerdy questions. But my focus will be on the applied use of these studies. Briefly about Copenhagen, capital of Denmark. We have a political goal to be the world's best city for cyclists. The present modal share for cycling in Copenhagen for all trips to, from, and inside the city is 26%. The car has a modal share of 31%. The political goal is to reduce the modal share of the car to 25% in only 4 years' time in 2025, which is also the year we work to become CO2 neutral. So even though Copenhagen has this reputation of a really good city for cyclists, we are still working on a very high ambition level to even further promote cycling in Copenhagen. And one way to do this is to normalize cycling, to treat it as a serious mode of transportation on a par with, for example, cars and public transportation. And one of the issues with cycling is that it's often invisible because it's low tech, doesn't emit CO2, doesn't pollute, doesn't create a lot of accidents. So it's often absent in our statistics and in our studies and also in our investment plans, unfortunately. So what we did back in 2009, the city of Copenhagen applied for co-funding from the state to create a national methodology to make economic assessments of cycling. The national model for transport economics in Denmark is called Teresa. And so some consultants called COBI, they looked at existing factors for describing car transportation. These are the blue circles you see here in the figure: time costs, vehicle operating costs, accident costs, and pollution and externalities. They also looked at some supplementary system benefits related to cycling, namely recreational values, comfort costs, health benefits, safety costs. And then they also described those. They also identified branding value and value for urban open space as relevant, but we're not able to quantify those. So that's maybe for future research to be done. And we actually ended up with our Ministry of Finance adopting this bioeconomics model into the national model for transport economics. But what can we actually use these social cost-benefit analysis for? This is a very nice summary, I think, from the Dutch consultancy Decision. You can use ex-post studies, which is already implemented projects that you evaluate, to evaluate your decisions and help future decisions. You can also make sure that tax money is spent well. When you do ex-ante studies, which are estimates of the effect of future investments, it can help you choose the best alternative if you have different scenarios. You can also use the studies to get support for a project by describing the potential benefits. You can optimize the investment to make the most out of your money. You can make it clear who benefits from a project if there are different stakeholders. And you can also get a sense of the uncertainties of a project. And the way we measure the economic effects is that when we want to compare cycling and car use from a given project, is that we look at how many kilometers will people bike or use their car more or less, given that we do that measure. And we can also count the number of accidents. And from the number of kilometers biked or driven in a car, we can then assess the effect on time and on health. Those are the big lumps, economically speaking, but also, of course, climate, air pollution, noise pollution, etc. And then we ended up with a lot of economic figures describing all these subcategories for 1 kilometer by bike and 1 kilometer by car. And then you can further divide it into the individual effects, so the internalized costs, and the effects for society at large, which is the external costs. And these values, they develop over time. So at present in Denmark, the official value of 1 kilometer done by bike is 85 euro cents per kilometer, a positive effect. And if you go 1 kilometer by car, it will cost society 15 euro cents. And if you use an e-bike, the gain will be 51 euro cents. But if you go 1 kilometer by electric car, it will be a cost of 14 euro cents. This is interesting because e-bikes are sometimes described as not as healthy and more dangerous, but you still see a significant gain for society. Whereas electric cars are often the big hype, but you see a cost almost as high as for a regular car because they still cause accidents and congestion. However, these are still just numbers. It's a little bit fictional. There's a lot of assessment and methodological considerations going into these values, and they develop over time and also from place to place. So the before mentioned Dutch consultants Decision, we had them make a comparison between the Danish method and the Dutch method to see how they differ as part of an EU project called Meschik. And they found that in the Netherlands, they value the price of climate and congestion effects higher, whereas we in Denmark value the effects of health and noise higher. So I'm not the one to decide who is right, but it's just to say there is an ongoing debate about what are the right prices here, but it at least gives a basis for comparing. Talking about health, last year the Danish Ministry of Transport actually increased the value of health related to cycling in Denmark. So now the total effect is 1.35 euros per extra kilometer cycled. This is the result of a cost of accidents, but also a positive gain of physical activity. And the ratio between the risks versus the benefits is 7 to 1. And this is because physical inactivity is actually a huge thing. We talk about sitting is the new smoking. We see large population studies from Denmark, the UK and China showing that you can reduce overall mortality between 28 and 40%, which is almost the difference between a smoker and a non-smoker. So if you can get people to bike regularly, that has a huge impact for health. And this is another study presented by some Swiss researchers, also comparing the risks of being exposed to air pollution and traffic accidents. Is by far outweighed by the positive benefits of being physically active across studies. This is good news for employers. A study by the Danish Industry Association in 2018 showed that if we increase cycling in the Copenhagen capital region by 10%, we would have 112,000 fewer sick days with employees not going to work, and that would give savings for the private sector of 8 million euros and the public sector for 3.8 million euros, and a total health gain of 63 million euros per year. Congestion savings also 25 million euros per year, because the car traffic would flow better because there would be fewer cars. But also for the private individuals, switching to cycling can be a benefit. This is a Brazilian study also from 2018, looking at both high income classes and low income classes. The gray bar is how much of the household budget they use for transportation. And then those who can shift to cycling, what would that mean for their disposable income? And you can see, especially for the low income classes, they could reduce the transport amount of their disposable income by quite a lot, freeing up money for their everyday lives, which is already precarious. So there are also some interesting effects for the individual. All these unit values, etc., are based on specific case studies.
19 minutes.
Sorry, someone has turned their mic on, I think.
Yes, it's moderator. I'm just warning you about timing.
Right, okay. So we've based these studies on specific projects, and we see internal rates of investments varying from 7.7% to 33%. When we compare those to other modes of transport like car, highways, or public transportation, it's relatively high. This is the regional cycle superhighways, showing an internal rate of 11%. And also just the basic costs of cycling infrastructure is way cheaper than many other infrastructure investments. The most recent study we have in Denmark is by the Technical University of Denmark, who showed that a complete network of regional cycle routes would have an internal rate of 6 to 23%. And they conclude that the benefits are non-local, that will be regional and national, given that it's congestion and health related. And so they suggest an increased state involvement in investments. Unfortunately, the recent transportation investment plan in Denmark has only allocated 2% to cycling. So there is still a way to go from having the cost-benefit studies to actually convincing politicians to invest in cycling. A future project from the Technical University of Denmark will be to describe the network effect of each segment of this planned network, so that we can more in detail describe where will we get the most effect, putting in missing links between existing parts of the network. So a more in-depth analysis of the cost-benefit effects. And then just for you guys to consider, we often talk about money as a scarce resource, but time is also a scarce resource. How can we describe transport modes that allow for both fitness and transportation at the same time? Health is also a scarce resource. The weather could also be discussed as a resource that needs proper management. How many degrees can we afford to go up in terms of global warming? Justice, is that a resource that we should also consider? Are there some social groups that should be prioritized in these analyses? And then space is also a scarce resource. We also only have the square kilometers we have present in the cities. So I will round up with this slide just for inspiration by Mark Major, suggesting that we should develop an accessonomics where we combine the cost with also the capacity and the use of space between different modes of transportation, maybe for future projects. But that was my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Marie. Well, I think the cities that are listening are happy to hear that actually the state should pay more for the cycle infrastructure. But even if Denmark is not doing that, even though that you have this cost-benefit analysis, there still has a long way to go to convincing the policymakers to do the right choices. I am handing over to Holger for some follow-up questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katharina. Thank you very much, Marie, for this super interesting, insightful presentation. One question that I would have concerns the internalization of external costs and benefits. So where would you see possibilities to internalize the external costs of car driving, but also then the external benefits of cycling? Maybe also to steer behavior a bit more to something that is good for society as a whole.
Well, financial measures can, of course, help balance this this very clear image that car driving is really costly to society and cycling is really beneficial. It's very clear when we look across all these different studies. And one way to sort of face that issue could be to introduce congestion charges. We don't have that in Denmark, and it's of course also a very political question. Another way is to promote financial incentives to cycle. This could be, for example, in Denmark, you get some tax refund if you use your car to commute over longer distances, but you get less money if you use your bike. So that is sort of not very logical. And I know in other European countries, there are financial schemes to support the purchase of electric bikes, cargo bikes, and even regular bikes, also in exchange for scrapping your old car. So that could also be some examples of financial incentives.
Good. I think we have some questions from the audience for you. Marco, can you please transmit them?
Yes, for sure. So the first comes from Colmrider, who is surprised to know that only 2% of transport funding in Denmark is allocated to cycling. So his question is that really low? Is this a big change compared from past investment levels?
So the figures I presented, that's from the state budget to transportation. Then, of course, we also have the municipal budgets. So in Copenhagen, the majority of the bicycle infrastructure is paid by the local government. That was not included in the figures I showed. But I think that the proportions of costs of these investments are just so disparate, like building new highways and new rail expansions. It's so extremely more costly than bicycle infrastructure, which is so extremely cheap. It's almost too cheap for its own good because it disappears in all the investment plans, but still considered too costly to increase further. I would say the 2%, when you look at the actual numbers of how much money has been put in, it's more or less the same as previous years. Yeah.
Okay. So and maybe a second one from Eki Kreutzwerk, who kindly asked if you go back a little bit to your slide number 9 and explain a little bit better what's that about.
So let me find my slide number 9. Sorry.
9.
So the values of each mode. So this is the Danish Ministry of Finance, who has these transport economic unit prices, where they have these standard prices of 1 kilometer by car, 1 kilometer by bike. And you can use these unit prices, for example, if you are planning to build a new bicycle bridge, and you make some estimates about, will that shift some trips from car to bike? How many kilometers will we shift? And then you can use these unit values to then assess what will the economic value of that modal shift then present. If that makes sense, hopefully.
Clear. Thank you, Marie.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm surprised. No more questions from the audience. And then Maria Jose, maybe have one. I have one in the meantime. Marie, from what you say, I gather that actually cycling needs more lobbying because it is too cheap and maybe it makes too many savings. So, and one that has low footprint is difficult to defend, and cycling is like the multitude, whereas the car has a big lobby. Yeah, the automotive clubs and so on, or they have an awesome power. You are also the vice president of the Danish cycle embassy. Is that doing anything to reach out and bring the value of little footprint to the attention of policymakers, or what do you suggest?
I think it's naive to think that cost-benefit studies alone will convince politicians. There are many other agendas that play into decision-making, but I think it's absolutely necessary to also have the good arguments and to be able to document the effects. So for me, it's part of the seriosifying cycling to treat it on a par with other modes of transportation. But political decision making is a complex process, and it's not always enough to have good arguments. And I think it's an issue that cycling is so cheap that it looks so small compared to the other modes of transportation. Sometimes we need to think on a larger scale to even be considered. Another issue can be that, for example, when you do socioeconomic assessments of car projects like a highway, the health issue is not taken into account. It's only when we assess cycling infrastructure. So you don't look at, will this highway make people bike less? And then what will the health cost be of this investment? So we need to integrate the variety of effects on a broader scale than only when we discuss cycling investments. But this is something that takes, lobbying and implementation and dissemination over time, I think.
Mm-hmm. This sounds like a criteria to be taken into account in economic impact assessment ex ante for big infrastructure projects.
I agree. I mean, in Denmark, cycling is declining, even though we, from the beginning, have quite high cycling levels compared to many other European countries. The national trend is going downwards. So cycling does not come by itself. It needs permanent investments and prioritization.
Okay, good. Maria Jose.
Hello, and thank you very much, Marie, for your very interesting presentation. I will just a couple of comments or short questions. At some point in your presentation, you said a statement. You said that values differ in time and place for the methodologies. I thought that was very interesting, and you mentioned some of the things you've noticed between the two cases, Netherlands and Denmark. So can you expand a little bit on that, if you noticed other patterns or other differences? And also, you at some point in your presentation, you said that 227,000 fewer annual sick leaves could be prevented by promoting cycling, which this connects with a topic that we already discussed previously in this webinar series about encouraging and promoting cycling to work. So has this somehow helped in promoting this kind of employer approaches or this kind of programs? So
right. So to take the first question about how values can develop over time and place, one example is the health effects of cycling, which in Denmark, like last year, has been increased by quite a lot. So the numbers are not static. And this is why I can show you the numbers from the 2009 study, but today those numbers don't look the same because they are, being updated every year. So it's a dynamic value basically, and it's part of the Danish Finance Ministry's, what is the economic value of a statistical life? It's a very abstract phenomenon. So don't take the numbers too literal or think of them as, things that cannot change. They change over time. and they also differ from country to country. Each country has their own unit values, so probably defined by a ministry, either of transport or finance. And we saw these quite big differences between Denmark and the Netherlands, who are both considered as being leading cycling countries in the world, but we don't agree on the methodology. And as I said, I'm not the one to say who is right, but this is something that is being continually discussed among experts. So use it for inspiration and for lobbying and for communication, but please also remember that it is still estimated values. And then we have the real world also, where people need to wake up in the morning and get to work and hopefully choose the bike. For your other question about the employer benefits, I will say that for the Danish Industry Association who did the study, this was really an eye-opener, and they can use the study when they are in dialogue with the specific companies to convince them to promote cycling among their employees. But actually some of the benefits goes to the employers, but of course also to the regions and the state, because they have less health expenses. But a smaller part of the benefits goes to the municipalities, who often has the majority of the investments. So this is also something, when we say this project has an internal rate of 33%, yes, but for whom? Who pays and who gets the benefit? It's super complex.
I want to take this question up again in the roundtable discussion, when we also can hear Michael on that. I think it is very relevant to ask this question.
Yes.
Maybe a final question from the floor, Marco.
Yes, so I have a question again for Marie from Colm Rider again. So do you have an estimate of all the funding available at national level, as opposed to the funding in Copenhagen at state level, provincial level, regional level?
If we have a clear overview, sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah, a clear overview of all the funding available at national level, as opposed to what you have in Copenhagen.
So yeah, in the national transport plan that I presented, where cycling accounted for 2% of the total budget, it is stated the money for national funds that then municipalities can apply for co-funding. So in Denmark, it would maybe be 40 to 50%, and municipalities can have co-funding from the state. And then the state also has some national roads where they have cycling facilities, and some of that money will also go into providing good bicycle infrastructure along the state roads. So that's basically what that money covers. And then each municipality, of course, has local budget processes. It runs differently in each municipality,
Sure.
and we can seek money there as well. In Denmark, the regions cannot fund infrastructure, but they can fund regional cycle superhighway secretariats who do dissemination and strategy planning. So
you have no total value of all the 3 levels, regional.
No, because we have 98 municipalities in Denmark, and they provide the majority of funding, and so it's a large task to to document how much money they spend. But it would be the Cycling Embassy of Denmark. We've tried to start the process of finding this value. It would be very interesting to have.
Interesting. Wow, super interesting. Thank you very much for this presentation. And I would like to introduce and hand over to our second speaker. Michael, please turn on your camera and your presentation, monitor 1, and the floor is yours.
So can you see something from my presentation? Okay.
All good and full screen. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I started as a transport planner, then as a mobility researcher, and now my specialty are active modes in transport, cycling, walking, and environmental effects. Bicycle versus cars, financial effects. These are the 4 topics I'd like to cover. First, some definitions we need for the further process, and then something of the Viennese study we made in 2010, 10 years ago, then an update of this study, and finally some conclusions. So internal and external costs in transport, I have to say a little bit to that. You all should be familiar with the costs by cause principle, or the polluter pays principle, which says basically who uses something or damages something has to pay for it. That's a quite common principle in our economy. And we have internal costs. These are the costs the user of a mode of transport has to pay. And we have the external costs, and these are the interesting costs, because the user doesn't pay the external costs. At the end, the taxpayer pays for it, so the general public. We made a study 10 years ago on these cost-benefit effects, and especially external costs in Vienna. Here's the literature to it, and here are the results. What you see here are the costs per kilometer cycled or driven by car. Same thing or similar thing Marie just has shown us. And at the left side, you see the indicators. We have health, noise, accidents, running costs of the vehicles, travel time, pollutants, and CO2. That's the climate part. And interesting in this case are only the external costs. And you see we have 3 categories I want to highlight. We have the health costs. We have a little less, about 90 cents positive income for the economy per kilometer cycled. We have accident costs, which are 4 times higher for cyclists per kilometer than by a car in occupants. And finally, we have climate costs, less than 1 euro cent per kilometer driven by car, and I will come to that a little bit later. These are the costs per kilometer. If you look at the total cost for the whole Viennese transport system, the road system, for the year 2009, quite a time ago, we find that the cyclists are actually putting a plus of more than 220 million euros per year into the total economy, whereas the car drivers, they are responsible for a loss of almost 190 million. Only by the kilometers they are cycling or driving. The public perception, we earned quite a shitstorm when we published these values. The public perception is motorists subsidize cyclists because they do not pay any taxes, things like that. Actually, it's the other way around. I love Andy Singer cartoons. This is quite impressive. Actually, cyclists, as I have shown you, subsidize car traffic. Car traffic is subsidized at a value of about 2,000 euros per car and year. That's a study from the University of, where was it? I think somewhere in Dresden. Next chapter, the update of the calculations we made in 2010. You remember we found less than 1 euro cent minus climate costs per car kilometer driven. And behind this figure stands the value of 1 ton of emitted CO2, which we calculated then with 50 euros per ton emitted. In the meantime, we have the principle of social costs of carbon, which are the costs 1 ton emitted CO2, the damage 1 ton of emitted CO2 makes to our environment. And newer studies, of course, the EU studies and German and UK studies, you can see here, they assign a much higher price per ton CO2 than we did. So it's 20 to 100 euros per ton in the UK, and it's in Germany, it's 200 up to 700 euros per ton. And also in the European Union's Fit for 55 guidelines, we start with 100 euros, and this will end with 270 euros per ton CO2. The new handbook, the brand new handbook of the external costs in the EC in 2019 says now that the external costs of car traffic sum up to about 13 euro cents per kilometer driven. And this is 3 times the value we had in 2009. So the external costs, as soon as you put more indicators into these external calculations, as soon as that, the external costs get bigger and bigger. These are the total external costs for the EU 28. In 2016, it's about almost 400 billion euro per year from car traffic only. The total external cost of the transport system sum up to over 800 billion euros per year. And the categories covered in these external costs, as you can see here, is accidents, congestion, climate, air pollution, and other things like noise or smaller things. And 4/5 of these external costs the car is responsible for 4/5 of these external costs. The categories are basically the same categories we used 10 years ago. You see in this frame the categories we have used, and there are some other categories added in the EU calculations. Land consumption, funny enough, is still missing. And if we talk about that, I have a rhetorical question. You cannot answer me. I have the answer prepared beforehand. What is the main objective of a transport system? Ask yourself that. The main objective of a transport system is to transport people and goods, not cars, not planes, not cycles, etc. People or goods are the transport object, and with a minimum costs, effort, damage, etc., etc. When I come back to space consumption, you see here that's an example from Münster. There are several other examples from all over the world. This is the space you need to transport 60 people. At the left, you have cars, in the middle, bus, right, bicycle. So the general figure is that cars need 10 times as much space to transport the same amount of people than all other modes. If you look at the lane that's 3.5 meters wide, I can show you here how many people you are able to transport within an hour. We are about 2,000 people per car, and even if all these cars are automated and connected, we might be able to double this to 3,600 people per hour on this lane. Whereas all the public transport systems have a multiple transport capacity. And if you look at cycling, it's now 7 times higher than what you can transport by cars. This depends on the occupancy rates of cars, the actual occupancy rates cars have. They have 4 or 5 seats per car, but only 1.2 persons are sitting in a car. And another thing I was highlighting before, the casualties we have. If you look at casualties in built-up areas, that's figures. These are figures from Germany 2019. You see that the non-motorized modes have the highest casualty figures, cycling, walking, and you have here the age cohorts. The older people are, the more likely they are getting killed when walking or cycling in inner cities. And I think that's a shame for a civilized economy. When you look at who is who is responsible or who is involved in accidents where cyclists are getting killed, it's almost half of the other conflict partners in an accident are cars and lorries, of course, which cause very heavy bicycle accidents. Conclusions. I try to get to some conclusions. This is an interesting graph from the Global Risks Report 2021. There have been former global risk reports before. I know you cannot read this because it's so small, and I'm going to highlight this a little bit. This is the likelihood that something will happen that will make damage to mankind. And everything that's right of this line is very likely to happen. And on the other axis, we have the impact strength. So what is above this line will have a very big impact on mankind. So interesting, I think, is this quadrant here, and I will enlarge this a little bit. This was also included in former global risk report. Interestingly, infectious diseases. We have COVID right now. Other infectious diseases might follow. But if you look at the green, at these green dots here, all the other highly possible risks with big impacts will be climate action failure, human environmental damage, natural resources crisis, and so on and so on. So I think that we should cope with our environmental problems we have in the transport sector. We have to. My conclusions, if we promote bicycle, this will cut costs in all major community problems. So let's look a little bit into detail. Infrastructure costs are much lower when you favor bicycle. Scarcity of space in inner cities. You need 1/10 of the space to transport the same amount of people by bicycle, public transport, or walking than with cars. Health problems. We have really big health problems in our societies. We can discuss this a little bit later. We can improve health significantly if we shift from car traffic the trips to cycle traffic or walking. Traffic safety also will be improved when we have more when we have more bicycle traffic and less car traffic in our cities. Quality of life in combination with all the environmental impacts, with the traffic safety. And at the end, we are very dependent on fossil fuels with our car traffic we have. So my conclusions, the policies we need in the future, motorized modes have to pay their external costs. Even the European Union says so, that we have to impose taxes on CO2. Villages and cities should promote the active modes, walking and cycling. And I think that the cheapest and quickest way to do so is to impose a maximum speed of 30 kilometers per hour for all motorized modes in cities. Car trips must be shifted to pedelecs, pedal electric bicycles combined with public transport for longer trips. Technology, that's a statement, will not save us this time. We are waiting for technology, for example, electric cars. Marie has shown us electric cars get rid of the propulsion problem, the energy problem, but not of all the others, accidents, space, etc. And to you politicians, stop kidding and tell your people that we have to do this. I thank you very much.
Now, this is really of tremendous interest. Again, thank you, Michael, for sharing your study and your findings and your recommendations with us. I really like the slide on the main objective on the transport theme, not to transport cars, but to transport people and goods. And I think the space dimension is also something that needs to be retained. Maria Jose, I think, has a follow-up question on that.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. It was really insightful presentation. And indeed, so I would like to go a bit deeper into the spatial dimension. So because during the pandemic, it has helped to reveal, or it has further highlighted, that public space is a very valuable and scarce as well asset in cities. So it needs to be distributed in a more balanced way. So I would like to know how you think that this spatial dimension can be considered within the cost-benefit analysis.
As I said before, you need 1/10 of the space to transport people on active modes in public transport. So this is one key figure for our city centers. And during the COVID pandemic, we found, for example, in Vienna, that our pavements or sidewalks were too narrow so that pedestrians could pass with the space required amongst them. We have, for example, in Berlin, the demand of the cyclists and of the pedestrians that the space should be divided between the transport modes evenly according to their transport, to the actual transport capacity. So when walking, cycling transports 60% of the peoples in Berlin, they also want to have 60% of the space in Berlin, of the road space. At the moment, it's a little bit different. Cars transport in Vienna, for example, about 1/3 or less than 1/3 of the people, and they have 80% for driving and parking of the street space. This is ridiculous in an economic way. So to assign a lot of space to a not really substantial mode. So we should go into this direction to assign the space according to the transport capacity the modes show in our cities.
Thank you very much.
Marco, I think there is a question from Eki that relates to the space as well that we can take as an ensuing question.
Oh, yes, I see it. So for Michael, did you take account of the system level? For example, space requirement of a tram should also include the unavoidable empty journeys of tram cars to and from depots. Is it something you considered?
Yes, I think my slides are still on. Can you see this slide here? Yes. That's a slide I also prepared for. You can't see it? Okay.
No, I think
Sorry,
you need to.
I try again. Did it work?
Share the screen again? Yes.
Okay. This is a similar picture. You see the space you need to transport a certain amount of people at the top by underground, then by tram, then by articulated bus, and then the same amount of people transported by car. And in all these calculations, the average occupancy rate is included normally. So in a car with 5 seats, the normal occupancy rate in Vienna city traffic is 12 people in 10 cars, which makes 1.2 persons per car you see driving. And also, of course, in the buses, in the undergrounds, my colleagues calculate normally with average occupation rates. So even when at midnight some trams drive around empty, in the peak hours they are overcrowded. In one tram you can transport, you see that in 3 trams you can transport this amount of people you transport with this lot of cars.
Great. Keep your slides open. Marco, there are further questions.
Yeah, I have one from Rose Powers. So she's asking, what advice would you give to regions, cities, and towns who have yet to undergo an assessment like you undertook in Vienna? Where do they start?
It's not so easy to be answered. You should try to get the help of the professionals, or you could start from the other way around. Try to allocate the space for the active modes in your cities. There was a long discussion with Marie on the amount of funding. The studies I know tell me you need an amount of approximately 30 euros per capita and year to be able to put something up for cycling on a good level.
Maybe another question, Katharina?
Can we see your slide number 10? 2 people were wondering what
Okay, I try this one. What was the question about? Sorry, I didn't get this.
What does well to tank mean?
Oh, this is the well to tank is the external cost that has been paid by the public from the energy source. If you pump oil from the ground until you can put gasoline or something else into your car at the petrol station. This is the way in between. You have to raffinate it, you have to transport crude oil with tankers or with pipelines, etc., etc.
Okay, good. Michael, a question from Giovanni Vargio from the regional authority in Sardinia. He's wondering about a methodology to assess the cost of car travel, like the internal cost. He says, is it correct to make an estimate using kilometers traveled multiplied by a number that is allowed and given by public authorities for the use of car? You know, it's like every government is publishing these tables where you are allowed to ask for the reimbursement when you have used your car. It's about 25 to 35 euro, I think, per car, per kilometer, depending on
euro cent, I hope.
Cent, yeah. Is this a fair methodology to assess the internal cost of car use for the cost of ownership reflection?
Actually, I don't think so, because in Austria it's 42 euro cent per kilometer, per car kilometer. You get reimbursed by your employer, for example, when you have to drive with your own car. I do not see a connection between kilometer and this amount. What we, for example, did is to calculate, for example, the CO2 costs, the CO2 emissions, when you take an amount of costs per ton emitted CO2, and there's a very strong regression between the fuel you use per 100 kilometers. It's about 7 liter gasoline per 100 kilometer, and we know that one liter of gasoline burned in the engine emits, I'm not sure, I think 2.5 kilograms CO2. It's much easier to calculate it this way.
But this would be an external cost. I think Giovanni asks about how to communicate the cost of car ownership to a car owner, to tell a family like, oh, actually, it actually costs you this much to own a car. Have you ever considered?
Okay. So sorry, I misunderstood.
The fuel and everything. So the internal cost for is it a fair methodology for the assessment of this?
I know that the motorist clubs of all countries publish figures how much a car costs, and this is about, I think, 4,000 to 5,000 euros per year. These are the costs of a private car, because you buy it and then it is worth much less after 1, 2, 3 years. You have to buy tires, motion lotions, and so on and so on. So most people only think that the petrol costs are the cost, but if you add insurance, taxes, etc., you're up to, I think, 4,000 to 5,000 euros per year.
Okay, thank you very much. One more question from the floor.
Yeah, I have one from Niccolò Panozzo about the policy recommendations that were shown by Michael. So the question is, shouldn't car makers be, in brackets, punished before end consumers? The cost can not only fall on people, he says.
Yes, basically I agree. On the other hand, we know for decades that mobility is too cheap overall. Public transport is too cheap in terms of external cost, and car traffic is too cheap compared with the other modes. At the end, it always pays the user of a mobility system or the taxpayer. That's the national economy, and the study I cited from the University of Dresden, I now remember, says that in Europe normally one car is subsidized with about 2,000 euros per year. This is 2/5 of the internal cost the user has to pay, because you do not have to pay for parking. If you go to a supermarket in the city center, you buy something. When you came there by car, at the cashier they pay you the parking ticket. Who pays the parking lot? Everybody who shops there. So the cyclists, the pedestrians, the public transport users, they pay the car parking space. These are subsidies, and so on and so on. The environmental costs are a really big cost. So mobility is too cheap. It has to be much more expensive at the end. We should come up to a system where the user pays for the damage he or she makes. I'm sorry for that. Everything else is subsidy.
I think
sorry, one sentence. If the car manufacturer has to pay it, what's going to happen? Cars will be more expensive. So at the end, the user again pays it.
I think it's tremendously interesting, this discussion, and I actually would like to open it to include Marie as well. Let's move to our joint roundtable discussion. I think these are enough direct follow-up questions to Michael. Thank you very much for trying to answer them. This discussion makes me think a little bit about the discussion in the energy sector. You know, with coal and nuclear being strongly subsidized, and the externalities paid by the public and the benefits going into private companies' pockets, and then renewables are trying to fight for a level playing field. So I think it's very important to talk about the costs. But let's first talk a little bit about the cost-benefit analysis such as that, and the transferability of the findings. Holger, first question.
Yeah, thank you. So it's actually a question to both Michael and Marie. So the methodologies you've been using have been developed for quite a while now. I think in both cases you've been working on this for more than 10 years. So my question would be, do you know if it has been used also by other cities, or if you know other examples for other methodologies that are used for cost-benefit analysis? And then maybe linked to that, what could be the role of the EU and also of EU regional policy in promoting the use of these methodologies, in your opinion?
So at least from in a Danish context, I'm not aware of other municipalities who've actually made cost-benefit ex-ante studies. And this is again linked to the fact that cycling investments are usually quite cheap, so the cost of actually doing the study is often not in comparison with the actual investment. So it's relatively seldom that we see ex-ante studies. But for the regional cycle superhighways, who has 746 kilometers of regional cycle routes, we have done these ex-ante studies because that's a significant investment, and not only municipal, but also regional and national stakeholders. I think that one thing is to integrate these methodologies in the formal processes and organizations that you have to work with. That's really important. So it's not enough that you as a city make your own methodology. The end goal should be to adopt it by your national Ministry of Transport or Finance. That was our approach, at least. But the WHO has a model called HEAT, which has been designed to be used internationally, and also with an interface that is supposed to be accessible also for policymakers around the world. So do check that out, those of you who don't have a methodology in place where you work in your given country. And then I also think that you have to distinguish between the overall average unit values, so what is the value of 1 kilometer done by bike or by car, and then the more detailed studies. So there are so many different aspects underneath that average unit value. So for example, the sick days for the employers, That's also a really important figure that is hiding underneath the total average value. The same thing could be said about congestion. How many hours do we waste in traffic jams because there is, in the rush hour, on average, 1.1 person in each car? How much of that could we free up if we prioritized more space-effective modes of transportation? So it's really also very related to context and also to the political debate that you have in your local government on a regional and on a national level. And the lucky thing is that it's almost impossible to find an agenda where cycling does not have documented benefits. I mean, I'm sometimes scared about sounding too religious because for me, it's just a mode of transportation allowing for people to have a good life and transport themselves around. It's not about the bikes, it's about the people. But it's just almost too good to be true on almost all the different agendas. So be flexible in picking the aspects of those calculations that is relevant for the current debate.
Yes, a few items to that. Marie has already said there might be a problem. She indicated cycle traffic is in Austria, for example, and many other countries situated at the level of the communities. And all these small projects they cannot afford a cost-benefit analysis for small scale works. Normally, the cost-benefit analysis I know are made by researchers or for bigger things. Marie said the cycle supersteers, the cycle highways, and I know a few publications, and in all those the benefit cost ratio for cycling or active modes is normally between 3 or 12 or 20. So if you invest €1, you get 3 to 20 euros benefit out of it. So that's a basic thing. And what I see in the last years is the more items are included in this cost benefit analysis, for example, the health costs. This was a very, very significant step to include the health costs, because road construction projects only calculated the gained time when they got rid of traffic jams. But if you include the health costs, it's much more in favor of the active modes. If we will include space consumption again, which is not so easy because we need roads for lorries, for delivering of goods and for fire brigades, etc. So it's not, the streets are not only accountable for the cars. So it's a little bit complicated. So experts should do a cost-benefit analysis. But in the literature, we have a lot of examples that it's always very, very, very favorable for the non-motorized active modes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah. So,
no, just if I may add something to this, within our membership at Polis, there's a good example of one cost-benefit analysis that was done by Rotterdam, and I think also, yes, the consultancy involved was, I think, also mentioned before by you, Marie. And it calculated the value of mobility for it was done, I think, in 2018, and also they did a scenario for 2024, and they speaking about items, like Michael said, there are some interesting insights in this study. For example, in relation to shopping, for example, they calculated that consumers who walk to shops in Rotterdam spend about 630 million on groceries and 180 million on clothes. So they did this kind of studies as well. And also on limited space, there's an interesting insight, is that because Rotterdam aims to build over 50,000 new homes by 2040, if thanks to active mobility, this house would reduce car ownership to 0 or 1, the additional space freed up would be worth at least 5 million. So this is also an interesting insight, taking into account the spatial dimension. So there are several other, and I think this can be also a good example. And as Marie mentioned before, everywhere, all are specific, to the context.
Yeah, We have people asking about the EU standard methodology, but I think, Marie, you've mentioned the WHO methodology. Do we have a link for that? I think that would be of tremendous interest. We have shared your Teresa methodology values in the chat with the participants. And so we're checking out the one for the WHO as well.
If you look for the heat tool,
yeah,
yes, you find it quite easily.
Okay.
And while you're looking for the heat tool, I have another thing to say. We also have to think of a social equity in mobility. I've found a British publication lately, I think it was from Bannister, who actually looked at the income classes and which kind of transport system people use depending on their income. And what he found was quite interesting. Airports, high-speed rails, motorways, etc., are normally used by high-income people, whereas people with lower incomes more use local transport, bus transport, cycling, and walking. This is also something on social economy. We get a real problem in Europe lately, because the lower and the middle incomes, they rather go down in the last 10 years. You do not get anything for your money on the bank account and so on. So even if we want to have social equity, we have to try to make targets accessible for people with bicycles, walking, public transport.
Marie?
Yeah, but the whole question about economic growth is also interesting. In Copenhagen, we also did a survey among consumers in Copenhagen that found that cyclists actually spend more money than car drivers outside of the shopping malls, the big shopping malls outside of the city, but at street level shops in Copenhagen, they actually spend more than car drivers. They shop more frequently and they shop more locally. So that is also some good documentation to have, and we've seen similar studies from many other cities, both in Denmark and other European countries. We've also tried to document how many persons are employed in the bicycle industry in Copenhagen, in bike shops, bike producers, bike repair shops, etc., to show also how cycling can stimulate the local economy. And I know that the ECF has done similar reports on the European job creation potential of increasing cycling. Holger can possibly develop on that. And then we see now with COVID and the aftermath of COVID, we see a tendency, at least in Denmark, to beginning of an overheating of the economy. And we already had a cap on public spendings defined by the EU, which has limited investments in cycling and many other modes of transportation. But now we are worried that all the good projects we are keen on investing in might be held back due to this risk of overheating the economy. And here again, there's a really good argument. Well, if we cannot build everything we want, let's start with the cheapest infrastructure. That would be cycling. Paradoxically, for politicians, it can be really nice to invest in shiny, expensive, big stuff. And sometimes cycling is just too modest to really appear on the agendas. But if you look at a straight economical point of view, I would say there are some good arguments.
Okay, Holger, a follow-up on this, and then let's go to the next round.
Yeah, so I think I just sent the links to our reports on jobs in the cycling sector and also on cycling and shopping if you want to have a look at that. Then just also again to make the promotion of the WHO seed tool. I think it's a great initiative that you can also use if you don't have previous experience, both for evaluating policies, so general policies for more cycling and concrete projects. So have a look at that as well. I know there are some initiatives all around Europe. For example, in Germany, there was cost-benefit analysis of cycle highway projects. In Belgium, there was analysis of regional cycling policies, I think both in Brussels, in Flanders, and in Wallonia. So yeah, to come back quickly to the role of the EU and EU regional policy, I think what we would really like to see in the future is to have that more streamlined also into European funding, both to have more research funding. We've been involved in some projects, for example, on the role of cycling on congestion, or on the time value. So for people cycling, for people using public transport and cars, to also use that for cost-benefit analysis, the value of the time that you use. And I think there need to be more projects like this in EU research funding, but then also applied in projects that are funded by the EU under the regional policy, to use the cost-benefit analysis there and to have financial means for that.
Great. Okay, good. Let's go and look and revisit a little bit more the impacts of cycling, the benefits, at which level occur the benefits and at which level occur the costs. Maria Jose, introduce the question, please.
Oh, yes, sorry. So yes, I'd like to ask you how also this cost-benefit analysis can influence also the decision-making process in your respective cases, or in other ways that you think that it can influence. At some point you mentioned it won't be the only tool that can bring the balance to one way or another, but how can it influence these processes?
It's a very complicated question, if I may start. I think our politicians are victims of a very bad misconception. There are several studies we talked about the shopping influence of cycling and walking, etc. As far as I know, politicians and shop owners alike think that most of their customers are car drivers, which isn't true. And I think that also politicians think that most of the people voting, giving them their votes, are also car drivers, which I personally think is also not true. So I think if politicians would listen a little bit to their voters, to people who do not have a car, etc., they might see that it's also a benefit for themselves to getting re-elected if they favor the non-motorized modes more than they do now. I think the politics more and more think that only car drivers are good voters for them, and I don't believe that. So maybe this could be something, because all the arguments we have shown today, Marie and me, I go with these arguments into presentations for 15, 20 years now, and the politicians always say, well, I don't believe that. That's really funny. So I can tell you what we should do. One point we try to research at our institute is how can we bring this knowledge we have to the politician and to put this knowledge into operation. And what I did not show you today was we talked about health. I have figures from Austrian schools. There's a study with almost 5,600 children in our Austrian schools. And guess what? Only 17% of them exercise per day the recommended 1 hour, which the World Health Organization recommends. For adults, we are recommended half an hour exercise per day, which is much too less for myself. Children should run around 1 hour per day, and only 17% of our school children do this. But we know on average they spend, on average, 2 hours with computer games, 2 hours with cell phones, plus 2 hours in front of the TV, which is 6 hours per day, yes, sitting inactivity. And when we favor the active modes, we have the chance to get them from sitting around to active mobility. We also know something that our mobility time budget per day is about 80 to 90 minutes. So everybody of us is mobile 1.5 hours per day. And if you walk or cycle, you can cover a much shorter stretch in this time than you cover when you use your car. So what we are doing and this 80 to 90 minutes are really constant over the last century in all different cultures we have worldwide. It's quite funny. So the more cars we use, the farther we go. And one question is, does this make us happier at the end? Does this improve our quality of life? So this is another argument. So I like to walk and I like to cycle, and I think this is a good thing for my quality of life.
Yes, you have already linked, you have already introduced our third topic, and it's perfectly fine to include it here, because health seems to be the largest beneficiary of cycling. It has the largest internal and external positive costs by far of all the other non-operational costs and benefits. And so how can we influence the decision making? Is there maybe an alliance between the mobility policy and those who are paying for the health cost? And who is it who is paying for the health cost? Marie.
Well, we need to distinguish between, these socioeconomic analysis and then a business case. It's two different things, but one can qualify the other. Because the business case really depends on who is paying upfront for these investments. And often that's the issue, that these benefits are so cross-sectorial, both in terms of transportation versus health versus climate. So if I want to persuade our Minister of Transport to allocate more national funding for cycling, it's actually his colleagues, the Minister of Health and Minister of Climate, who will get the benefits. Likewise, depending on if you're talking on a national, regional, or local level, we also have cross-sectorial benefits. And that's really positive that we have all these benefits across sectors, but it's also so complex because it's not necessarily the stakeholders who pay who get the benefits. So this is why we should use these cost-benefit analysis in a very considerate way and be aware that it's not automatically a good business case just because the numbers look good for cycling, because it's really context related depending on who actually has the cost up front. I think Michael also raised some good points about the present methodology also has its limits. Like our consultants pointed out already back in 2009, there are values that we cannot quantify, but they are there. Life quality, mental health, which has been like really in the public debate during COVID. Many people have really suffered just being inside all day, not getting out, getting fresh air, getting a little bit of exercise. So just the mental health value of having your daily cycling commute, even though you're not the kind of person who go to the gym and do sports, because not everyone is the perfect human being doing sports also as a separate activity, but integrating those things in your daily transportation can actually have a huge impact. But this is assumptions. And as far as I understand it, the physical health sector and the mental health sector, I mean, we haven't yet been able to quantify these effects. This is something that it could be very interesting to look into in the future. And then the value of space. I have one case from Copenhagen that I didn't mention in my presentation, but we have a high street where we reduced the number of car lanes from 4 to 2. So we took away half of the road space for cars. We widened the sidewalks and the bicycle tracks. So we have 4 meter wide unidirectional bicycle tracks in each side of the street. So a total of 8 meters for cyclists. And what we saw that car traffic, of course, went down, but the total number of persons using the streets, including pedestrians, bus passengers, cyclists and motorists increased by 20% in 5 years. And that's not all, so that's quantifiable. We can calculate, we can estimate the value of that. But the street itself changed its function because due to the reduction of noise from the car traffic, you can now have a conversation in the street. Before you would just get from A to B and be gone, but now people hang out. The street is a destination. It's no longer only a transport corridor. So what value does that have, that all of a sudden our city is a place where you just don't want to escape away from it, but you actually want to use it? It's ephemeral, it's hard to quantify, but it's there and it's real. And it's something that the politicians also notice when they go by and they see all their voters taking in this part of the city that was not accessible before.
Okay, Holger?
Yeah. On the link between cycling and health, I think much more could be done there. I think that's also kind of a general issue in health policy that maybe now it's more about treating diseases than about preventing diseases. So I think there needs to be a change there. There's some good examples. I think, for example, in Germany, we have a big campaign for cycling to work, which is sponsored and supported by the biggest health insurance. So there's a link there. I think, well, in Belgium and the Netherlands, there is now talk about introducing smart charging models for car traffic. So basically, you pay not a fixed congestion charge, but based on how much you drive your car, how many kilometers. Maybe in the future, that's something to think about for cycling as well, like not smart charging, but smart benefits. So you kind of internalize the external benefits in a way that you get paid for cycling the kilometers. I mean, for example, here in Belgium, you get a subsidy from your health insurance for subscribing to the gym. Why not have that for cycling as well?
That's great. Okay, Maria Jose and then Michael, please be brief. We're nearing our end.
Yes, many interesting things has been said. I would just like to stress the fact that of cooperation between transport and health, which needs to translate at city level into cooperation between departments, and also completely agree with what you said. Not only physical health, but also mental health. So this kind of cooperation needs to be really fostered.
Okay, we finished lately a project called Active to Work. When you go to work, it's your personal business how to get to work. If you drive by car, you save a lot of time, not money, but time. If you cycle, it takes you much longer to go to work. But on the other hand, your employer, saves sick days and so on, has a big benefit, and also the national economy has a big benefit. And our project proposed that we should take the working hours and the travel to work hours at a fixed at a fixed time, and when you take the bicycle instead of the car, you have to work less hours. So to kind of rearrange the benefit the economy and the employer has. We are still looking for enterprises introducing the system. Well, a few do it on a small scale, but not on the big scale.
Oh, super interesting. I love this discussion. So many valuable proposals. Unfortunately, we're nearing the end and we need to come to a conclusion. I would like to highlight to all the participants that in the evaluation form, when we close this webinar, there will be a question if you are interested in a future webinar that details car restrictive policies in cities and the economic effects on retailers and how to build the support. Because as you've all said, ex ante, everybody's always against and thinks, oh, this is going to ruin the high street business. And after the measure is implemented, people are actually quite happy, including the local shop owners. So we want to bring together such examples. And so tick the box in the evaluation form if you want a webinar on follow-up in this area. Yeah, love also Maria Jose's recommendation for cooperation between city departments of health and of mobility, but I think such a cooperation would need to be facilitated. So I don't know, is Polis or the European Cyclist Federation willing and able to facilitate such encounters? Because otherwise I think it will be an unusual meeting and maybe not so conductive. Okay, maybe it's a bit of a surprise, this question. But Holger and Maria Jose, maybe take up this answer and wrap it around with your impression of this webinar and your main takeaway lesson, please.
Yeah, I think both Polis and DCF are involved in the Transport, Health and Environment Pan-European Program of the WHO and the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. So I think in that respect, both our organizations are already promoting this cooperation, at least at the international and at the national level. But yeah, I think also the cooperation at city level could be included there. And yeah, I think my general impressions here from the webinar is that definitely there's a lot of material. As you see, I think we could discuss at least 3 or 4 hours more about this topic. I think there are some methodologies, 2 of them which we saw today, which are already quite advanced, and which could also be used by other cities or by other actors to carry out cost-benefit analysis for cycling policies and projects. There are others, as we mentioned, the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, the UK. I think one important point is to bring all this together and to have a better coordination at the European level. So yeah, I would like to repeat my call also for the EU and for EU regional policy to get more active and to get more involved in this, also in terms of funding and of support for regions and cities to carry out these analyses.
Great. Final wrap-up words from Maria Jose.
Okay, yes. No, of course. So at Polis, one of our main activities is to foster this exchange of best practices and to foster this learning from one city to others. So this transferability also. So one of our working groups is specifically on transport and active travel and health. So here is where the space where we get together with experts on health from different departments, programs that have been implemented, how they have been done, and to promote this exchange. So I think it's really important at the local level. And regarding the lessons learned, well, many. I think maybe I would stress what Mikael said, the importance of political will. He said transferring knowledge into operations. So how do we do this? The importance of internalizing external costs, that has been also mentioned, and again cooperation. So those I think would be like the main three points or takeaways I can highlight. And thank you very much, because it was really interesting and I've learned a lot as well. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, honestly, I'm the biggest beneficiary, even though the organizer. I love this type of dense knowledge exchange and so many good contributions here. So I would like to conclude by really extending a very big thank you to Marie and Michael. I know that you are very solicited. Thank you for being with us today. And we will take into account what you've said and try to promote it as good as we can at the city and the regional level, as today, but also beyond this webinar. And thank you, Holger and Maria Jose. European Cycling Federation and Polis to contribute and to promote and to support our activities. So that was it today from the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform. Thank you to my team as well, and I wish all of you a very excellent afternoon, and I hope that you continue thinking a lot about the monetarization of the internal and the external costs of cycling versus cars. Goodbye.
Thank you.